Every word you speak has the potential to move hearts, inspire minds, and shape destinies. Yet, only a few know how to use their voice like a true leader, with clarity, authority, and impact. Leadership isn't just about commanding others, it's about communicating vision, purpose, and confidence in a way that makes people want to follow you. In a world filled with noise, the leader's voice must rise above, calm, confident, and compelling. This book isn't about fancy words or manipulation. It's about mastering the art of presence, understanding the psychology behind influence, and learning how to speak in a way that awakens trust and action. Chapter 1. The Leader's Voice. Speaking with authority and authenticity. The difference between someone who speaks and someone who leads often comes down to one thing. The leader's voice is a bridge between conviction and care. Authority without authenticity sounds hollow. Authenticity without authority sounds uncertain. The leader's voice is neither performance nor passive confession. It's a deliberate instrument that communicates clarity, competence, and connection in a single breath. Begin by understanding that authority is amplified by preparation and presence. Preparation supplies content and structure. Presence supplies temper and timing. When you prepare, you know the core point you must land, the one intuitive image or story that will make the idea stick, and the practical imperative you want the listener to act on. Presence is trained by small rituals. Grounding breath, an opening sentence that names value, we will do X to protect Y, and a slow, steady cadence that signals control. Authenticity then comes through strategic vulnerability, brief admissions that humanize without undermining competence. A leader may say, "I underestimated this risk," then immediately pivot to a corrective plan and invite contribution. This pattern builds trust because it shows ownership plus action. Another critical element of the leader's voice is economy. Fewer words with higher meaning. Remove qualifiers that weaken authority, words such as just, maybe, or I think, when certainty is required, and replace them with concise directives or calibrated proposals. Use contrast and contrastive phrasing to make choices obvious. We can maintain the status quo and risk X, or we can choose Y and secure Z. Contrast simplifies cognition and reduces decision paralysis. Voice quality matters. Pitch, pace, and volume convey emotional truth faster than words. A calm downshift in tempo during high-impact lines gives listeners time to absorb. A modest rise in volume on the key sentence underscores urgency without shouting. Practice vocal control with short exercises. Record a 60-second message, listen for filler words, and practice eliminating them while preserving warmth. Finally, the leader's voice is oriented toward the listener's mental model. Great leaders don't speak to impress, they speak to align. They ask themselves before every sentence, what does my audience need now? What question do they need answered next? When you speak from that listener-first posture, your authority becomes servant leadership. You lead by making the path clear, not by dominating the stage. Practice this posture, pair it with concrete preparation, and your voice will shift from noise into the instrument that causes people to listen, trust, and act. Chapter 2. Clarity of thought, structuring ideas. That lead people follow speakers who make complexity simple without losing truth. Clarity of thought is the precondition of clarity of speech. If your mind is tangled, your words will leave knots in listeners' heads. The first habit of clear leaders is ruthless prioritization. Every message should have one central claim and two supporting reasons at most. This constraint forces compression of thought and reduces cognitive load for your audience. Structure your speech with a three-part architecture: context, insight, and action. Begin by naming the landscape briefly to orient attention. Right now, we face X. Next, deliver the insight that reframes the landscape, an interpretation grounded in evidence, narrative, or comparative logic. Finally, end with the action that naturally follows from the insight. This triad satisfies the listener's need for meaning and utility. Precision is another pillar. Avoid vague nouns and abstract adjectives. Replace improve performance with reduce average completion time from 7 to 5 days, and your message gains force. Use concrete examples and numbers where possible. Statistics and brief case examples act as anchor points. Framing choices matter. Lead with the implication you want remembered rather than burying it in the middle. Transitions between ideas must be explicit. Signpost your structure, first, second, finally, so listeners can anticipate and follow the logic. The rhetorical device of contrast is powerful. Present the flawed alternative before your solution to let the problem show why the solution matters. Lastly, cultivate the discipline of the short summary. End every major communication with a one-sentence takeaway that you can repeat without notes. The repeatable sentence acts as an echo that listeners leave with and anchors follow-up actions. Train by writing 30-second summaries of complex projects and testing them on a colleague. Iterate until the listener says, "I get it." Clear thinking produces clear speech, and clear speech produces focused action. That is how leaders move ideas from concept to consequence. Chapter 3. The Rhythm of Persuasion, Framing Stories and Evidence. Persuasion by leaders is not slick manipulation. It is the orchestration of frame, story, and evidence in a rhythm that respects both heart and mind. Frames are the first move. They set the interpretive lens through which facts are viewed. Choose a frame that resonates with your audience's identity and stakes: safety, growth, legacy, care. Once framed, stories humanize and lower cognitive defenses. A short, vivid narrative about a person or moment makes abstract risk or opportunity real. It gives listeners an emotional path into data. Stories should be compact and relevant. Introduce a protagonist, a dilemma, and a small resolution that points to the broader lesson. After the frame and story, bring evidence, crisp facts, precise metrics, or a brief comparison that supports the claim. Evidence anchors the emotional resonance in reality and gives skeptical listeners a place to land. The rhythm matters. Begin with a frame, insert a short story to create empathy, and then tighten with evidence to convert sentiment into conviction. Use rhetorical questions strategically to keep listeners mentally engaged. Questions that they answer silently create cognitive involvement. Also practice contrastive evidence. Show the costs of inaction as clearly as the benefits of action. Sometimes loss aversion motivates better than promise. Finally, invite small commitments. A persuasive talk should not end as a lecture, but as a set of micro yeses, small, low-risk actions that allow people to continue saying yes as they escalate. When you sequence framing, story, evidence, and micro commitments in a measured rhythm, your persuasion becomes ethical, durable, and mobilizing. Chapter 4. The Language of Decision, How Leaders Make Choices. Sound, simple. Decisions create clarity for organizations. Communicating them well preserves alignment and minimizes disruption. Leaders make choices sound simple, not by oversimplifying complexity, but by clarifying trade-offs and responsibilities. Begin with the essential move. Name the decision and the decision-maker up front. Avoid ambiguity about authority. People resist fuzzy leadership. Next, outline the top 2 or 3 factors that inform the decision: data points, strategic principles, and constraints. Then state the chosen path and the immediate next steps. This formula respects the audience's need for rationale without burying them in process. Use if-then contingencies to show preparedness. If X happens, we will do Y. Contingencies reduce fear and provide clear activation triggers. Leaders should also communicate what the decision does not change. This helps preserve stability. Define who is accountable for execution and the expected timeline. For higher-risk decisions, pair the announcement with a short, pre-mortem summary of potential failure modes and mitigation plans. Transparency builds credibility and reduces rumor. Language matters, prefer action verbs and concrete deadlines. Use passive voice sparingly, it obscures ownership. Finally, create a public learning clause, an explicit time to review the decision's outcomes and adjust. Negotiating follow-ups assures stakeholders that decisions are adaptive rather than dogmatic. When communicating decisions this way, you transform ambiguity into actionable clarity and maintain trust through steady, accountable language. Chapter 5. Presence and Nonverbal. Authority. The unspoken half of leadership. What you do with your body often speaks louder than what you say. Presence is the nonverbal currency of leadership. Nonverbal authority includes posture, eye contact, gestures, facial tone, and the timing of silence. Start with posture. Stand or sit with an open chest and grounded stance. This signals availability and steadiness. Eye contact builds connection. Use it intentionally to include others when you speak and to listen without distraction. Gestures should be purposeful, not repetitive flourishes, but calibrated movements that emphasize structure and transitions. Facial tone must match content. Calibrate micro-expressions so that your face reflects understanding, not surprise or impatience. Equally important is the use of silence. Strategic pauses create cognitive space for important lines to land and give listeners time to process. Avoid the urge to fill every gap. Silence is a leadership tool. Chapter 6. Empathy as Strategy. Listening to lead. Leading with empathy is not soft, it's strategic. Empathy reveals what stakeholders truly value, what hidden constraints they face, and how proposals will land in the real world. The skill begins with intentional listening. Listen to understand, not to rebut. Use inquisitive silence. After someone speaks, pause for 2 seconds before replying. This gives them space to finish and signals that you value their contribution. Ask clarifying questions that surface motivations and constraints. What matters most to you about this outcome? And paraphrase briefly to confirm understanding. Empathetic leaders also use calibrated disclosure. Share a small, honest piece of context about your constraints to invite reciprocity. This mutual vulnerability accelerates trust. Importantly, translate empathy into decisions, gather concerns, then demonstrate how the chosen path addresses or mitigates them explicitly. When you publicly enumerate stakeholder concerns and how you responded, people feel listened to even if they disagree. Finally, practice structural empathy. Create channels for ongoing feedback such as short pulse surveys, office hours, or rotating listening sessions, so empathy becomes a habit rather than a sporadic posture. Empathy practiced with discipline moves teams faster because it reduces hidden friction and increases voluntary buy-in. Chapter 7. Persuasive Storytelling. Crafting narratives that move. People stories are the architecture through which meaning sticks. A persuasive leader uses concise narratives to frame challenges, humanize vision, and map the path forward. A compact leadership story has 5 parts: a relatable protagonist, a clear tension, a pivotal choice, a concrete action, and an implied invitation to join. Keep stories short, 60 to 90 seconds, and focused on a single illustrative point. Use sensory detail sparingly to create vividness, and always ensure the protagonist's arc maps to the audience's context. Use stories not as theatrical embellishment, but as logical evidence that demonstrates the feasibility or necessity of an idea. When telling stories, practice cadence, slow slightly at the tension point, quicken during the action, and end with a calm, decisive line that maps to the desired action. Storytelling also requires brevity. Trim non-essential background and focus on the moment that changed the course. Finally, distribute stories in multiple formats, short spoken anecdotes in meetings, one-paragraph versions in emails, and a 2-minute recorded version for broader reach. Repetition across formats reinforces memory and increases the chance that the story will be retold by others. Powerful narratives turn proposals into shared identity. Chapter 8: Negotiation and Conflict. Speaking when stakes are high. High-stakes communication requires a different toolkit: steadiness, prepared options, and the ability to reframe conflict as a joint problem. Begin by separating people from problems. Name the relationship and the issue separately to reduce personalizing. Use principled negotiation. Anchor to objective criteria. Propose multiple options for mutual gain, and insist on measurable standards. Prepare a short opening that states the shared interest and the key constraint. This sets an agenda that is problem-solving rather than accusatory. Listening is essential. Use reflective statements to ensure the other party feels heard before you introduce your alternative. When tensions rise, slow the pace of your speech and ground your posture. Slow speech lowers physiological arousal. Use calibrated questions to probe interests. What would need to change for this to be acceptable? Such questions surface possibilities rather than triggering defensiveness. Also, structure a fallback plan and communicate it calmly. Knowing the boundary reduces brinksmanship. When agreements are reached, capture them precisely. Who does what by when, and what metric signals success. Finally, end conflict conversations with a relational restoration step, an explicit acknowledgement of the other person's perspective, and a short plan for follow-up. This seals trust and preserves the ability to work together after disagreement. Chapter 9: Presence in Public Speaking, from Room to Broadcast. Public speaking for leaders scales influence. The same principles that govern small group leadership apply, but require amplification. Prepare the single core message and build a tight structure around it. Hook, problem, insight, evidence, and call to action. Open with a hook that connects to emotion or curiosity, an unsettling statistic, a short rhetorical question, or a vivid image to capture attention in the first 10 seconds. Use stagecraft, move with intent, control pacing to guide emotional response, and use projection that is natural but carries to the back of the room. Visual aids should support, not replace your narrative. Use one strong visual per key point and avoid dense slides. For broadcast settings, reduce referential language that depends on shared context. Explain briefly but confidently any internal terms. Rehearse transitions aloud and mark breaths as anchors. Finally, build a closing that translates inspiration into a clear next step, what you want the audience to feel, think, and do. And repeat the one-sentence takeaway twice in closing to increase retention. Practice public presence by recording and reviewing, soliciting honest critique, and iterating. Chapter 10: Coaching Conversations, Developing Leadership through Talk. Great leaders grow other leaders through coaching conversations that surface potential and unlock action. Coaching is question-driven, future-focused, and accountability-oriented. Start by asking a clear opening question. What outcome do you want here? And then use scaffolded questions that move from insight to experiment. What's one small test you can run this week? What would success look like? How will you measure it? Use active listening, reflective summaries, and short micro-commitments to convert insight into action. Provide feedback that is specific, timely, and tied to observable behavior, not identity. Close the coaching session with a precise accountability step and a scheduled follow-up. Encourage autonomy by asking about obstacles and next steps rather than prescribing them. The aim is to increase others' problem-solving capacity. Over time, regular coaching conversations create a culture of learning and distributed leadership. Chapter 11. Speaking under pressure. Preparing for high stakes. Moments. High-stakes moments are the leadership crucible. How you speak under pressure determines trust, morale, and momentum. Preparation is non-negotiable, but it must be paired with physiological regulation and mental scripts that fit the unexpected. Begin by mapping the scenario, identify the audience, the likely emotions in the room, the decision points, and the smallest acceptable outcome. Preparation then focuses on 3 layers: content, architecture, and contingency. Content is the one-sentence core message you must land. Everything else is support. Architecture is the 90-second opener that names the situation, states the stakes, and sets an initial direction. This builds immediate orientation. Contingency planning requires anticipating the most probable objections and scripting brief responses that acknowledge concern and redirect to action. But planning alone fails if your body betrays you. Train a simple physiological protocol to use before and during the moment. 3 rounds of box breathing to lower heart rate, a grounded posture ritual, feet planted, shoulders relaxed, and a brief vocal warm-up, humming and a few low-toned vowels to stabilize pitch. These small physical anchors reduce adrenaline-driven collapse and give your voice steady control. In the moment, use structure as a calming force. State the context in 1 line, deliver the decision or proposal in 1 line, then offer 2 concrete reasons and 1 immediate next step. People prefer short, predictable structures in stress because they reduce cognitive load. If interruptions occur, use a parking and promise technique. Park the question, I'll return to that in 2 minutes, offer a promise to handle it later, and continue. This prevents reactive derailment while honoring the asker. For hostile or highly emotional audiences, employ 3 relational moves in sequence. Validate the feeling, I hear why this is upsetting, state the boundary or decision, here's what we must do, and invite a limited corrective action. What I can do is X. Tell me which part you'd prioritize. This pattern both de-escalates and preserves momentum. Finally, after any high-stakes exchange, run a 10-minute private debrief. What went as planned? Where did you lose control? Which scripts worked? And what micro-adjustment will you make next time? Capture the learning in a short note so you can refine your contingency scripts. Speaking under pressure thus becomes a repeatable competency built from scenario mapping, physiological regulation, compact structures, and rapid after-action learning. When you combine those elements, fear becomes a signal you can manage rather than a force that manages you. Chapter 12. The Ethics of Influence, Persuasion, with Integrity. Influence is an ethical responsibility. The way leaders persuade shapes cultures and outcomes long after the speech ends. Start with the moral baseline. Never manipulate facts, hide trade-offs, or exploit vulnerabilities for short-term gain. Influence with integrity requires 3 habits: transparency, proportionality, and reciprocity. Transparency means you disclose major assumptions, key trade-offs, and the limitations of your knowledge when you present a case. Doing so does not weaken persuasion. It enhances credibility because people prefer a leader who shows the math and the uncertainty. Proportionality demands that the methods you use match the stakes. Do not deploy emotional appeals that overshadow evidence when the decision is technical. Conversely, do not drown a moral case in dry statistics when people need narrative to connect. Reciprocity is the ethic of giving. Before asking for commitment, provide value, insight, context, or a small concession, so influence feels reciprocal. not extractive. Practically, adopt a persuasion checklist. State the core claim, provide evidence, disclose the largest uncertainty, present two alternative options, and end with a clear ethical justification that ties the claim to shared values. Also practice benefit balancing when persuading. Explicitly weigh who benefits and who bears costs and propose mitigation for those costs. This reduces moral friction and signals that your influence seeks collective good. When pushing for change, create structured consent points, micro-consents for incremental steps, so stakeholders can opt in without feeling railroaded. Finally, institutionalize an influence review in your organization for major campaigns, a small panel that evaluates whether messages are truthful, fair, and aligned with organizational values. Influence with integrity produces sustainable buy-in and reduces resentments that corrosive persuasion leaves behind. The leader who cares about how influence is exercised creates a culture that trusts speech because it expects honesty. Chapter 13. Vocal Mastery. Tone, pitch, and presence in detail. Voice is a technical instrument you can train. Small adjustments in tone, pitch, and rhythm radically change credibility. Understand three vocal domains: resonance, articulation, and dynamics. Resonance is the body's ability to produce rich, low frequencies that project authority. Develop it through regular humming and gentle low-range vocal exercises. Articulation is clarity, practice crisp consonants, and purposeful pauses to avoid mushy phrasing. Dynamics is the controlled variation of loudness and pace that makes a speech alive. It is the difference between monotone and music. A practical daily routine, 5 minutes of diaphragmatic breathing, 60 seconds of humming from low to mid-range, and 90 seconds of articulation drills, tongue twisters at a slower than normal pace to reinforce clarity. When preparing a talk, mark your script for vocal peaks and valleys. Bold the line that needs extra resonance, underline the phrase that should speed up, and circle the sentence that requires a pause. During delivery, monitor your breath support. Short, shallow breaths collapse resonance and spike pitch. If you notice pitch rise, the questioning tone, take a breath and finish the sentence grounded, reverting to a downward or neutral inflection. Use silence intentionally. A half-second pause before a key sentence gives the audience time to lean in. A 2-second pause after a major claim lets it imprint. Also practice the call and response cadence for persuasive lines. State a claim, pause, then restate it shorter and stronger. This creates cognitive echo. Record yourself weekly, listen critically for habitual vocal tics, upspeak, breathiness, clipped endings, and target 1 tick per week for correction. Vocal mastery is not about sounding like someone else. It is about using your unique voice with precision, bringing warmth and authority together so your message lands with both credibility and humanity. Chapter 14. Designing compelling slides and visuals for leadership talks. Visuals are amplification tools. When designed poorly, they distract. When designed well, they focus attention and simplify complexity. A leader's slide deck should follow the principle of 1 idea per slide and 1 visual per idea. Use clean layouts, a short headline, a single chart or image, and a 1-line takeaway. Replace data dumps with a single clear metric and a short interpretive sentence. Don't let numbers speak alone. For charts, prefer simple bar and line charts with clear labels and a highlighted data point to call attention. Avoid pie charts that complicate comparison. Use images sparingly and only when they create emotional or conceptual resonance. A photo that humanizes a number or an icon that visualizes a process. Typography matters. Use large, readable fonts and limit any slide to 3 levels of hierarchy: headline, subtext, and footnote. Prepare a slide narrative where each slide is a sentence in your story. When you remove a slide, the story still flows, which ensures redundancy and clarity. For remote presentations designed for small screens, high contrast colors, larger fonts, and simplified charts that remain readable on mobile devices. Practice advancing slides with a rehearsed sentence that links the previous slide to the next. Avoid reading slides verbatim. Finally, include a one-slide appendix with additional evidence for skeptical audiences and invite them to explore it after the talk. This keeps your main flow uncluttered while preserving credibility for detail. Hungry listeners. Good visuals do not replace leadership voice. They extend it, used properly. Slides make complexity navigable and decisions easier. Chapter 15. Building authority before you speak. Reputation and microactions. Authority accrues from consistent microactions long before you say a word in a meeting. Reputation is the pre-speech advantage that makes your voice carry weight. It is built through reliability, competence, and visible contributions. Start by auditing your reputation across 3 axes. Competence, does your output prove skill? Character, do people find you trustworthy? And care, do people feel supported by you? Identify one micro-action in each axis to accelerate reputation. Publish one short case note of recent work, honor 3 promises publicly in a team update, and initiate 2 quick support gestures for colleagues this week. Visibility matters. Document small wins and learning transparently so others see the track record rather than assume it. Authority also benefits from domain specificity. Be known for a tight cluster of topics rather than a vague expert label. When you are first in a room, use a short credential line only when necessary and brief. Let your contribution, not your biography, lead the conversation. Additionally, cultivate a pattern of making high-quality micro-interventions in meetings, a clarifying question, a tiny synthesis of discussion, or a practical next step. These micro-interventions accumulate into a perception of steady leadership. Finally, protect reputation with deliberate follow-through. If you commit, deliver visibly and on time. Authority built this way means that when you speak, fewer words are required because people already trust the maker behind them. Chapter 16. Teaching. Through talk. Making. Learning. Stick in organizations, leaders are often teachers. Making learning stick requires design, repetition, and activation. Use a 3-part learning scaffold: concept, example, and practice. Introduce a concept in one clear sentence, follow with a concrete example from real work, and then design a brief practice that requires a small, real-world application within 48 hours. Learning that sits in a meeting but never touches the work decays quickly. Reinforce the concept through short, repeat exposures, emails, 1-minute huddles, and a micro-template for application. For group learning, create learning teams of 3 people who commit to practicing the idea and reporting back in a week. Social accountability multiplies adoption. Use simple tools like checklists and if-then application cards that transform abstract guidance into on-the-job prompts. Also, measure uptake with a 1-question pulse survey 2 weeks later. Have you applied X in the last 14 days? Track responses and iterate on practice design if adoption is low. Finally, model learning publicly. Share your own small experiments and failures. When leaders demonstrate learning humility and process, the organization follows, and teaching becomes cultural rather than episodic. Chapter 17. Media. Training for leaders. Interviews, panels, and public Q and public media moments compress reputation and reach. Handle them with strategy. For interviews, prepare 3 sound bites, short, repeatable lines that capture your key message. Anticipate the reporter's agenda and prepare 2 bridging phrases that return the conversation to your points without seeming evasive. On panels, identify one concrete contribution you can reliably make, an example, a metric, or a provocative question, and use it to anchor your presence. For Q&A, practice the pivot. Acknowledge the question briefly, answer the core in one line, then bridge to your prepared message. When faced with hostile questions, slow your pace, name the concern neutrally, and offer a concise corrective followed by an actionable step. Media also requires preparation on nonverbal fronts. Dress for the medium, choose a neutral background for video, and control ambient sound. Finally, rehearse with a media coach or a colleague who plays the reporter. Pressure tests reveal gaps and build reflexes. Media training is not about spin. It is about clarity, control, and converting attention into accurate narrative. Chapter 18. Coaching. Yourself to better talks, rehearsal, feedback, and iteration. Great talks are the product of iterative rehearsal and disciplined feedback, not inspiration alone. Build a rehearsal loop, draft the core message, practice aloud for timing, record, review, solicit feedback, and refine. Each loop should be short and focused. Identify one variable to adjust per rehearsal: pacing, vocal variety, or transitions. Use targeted drills. Rehearse the opening until the first 90 seconds are calm and precise. Practice the closing until the takeaway can be delivered in one breath, and simulate interruptions so you can keep structure under pressure. For feedback, create a compact rubric: clarity of message, emotional arc, vocal control, and audience engagement, and ask reviewers to score each dimension with one observation and one suggestion. Avoid unfocused praise. Actionable critique leads to improvement. Also, practice micro-iterations in real contexts. Test a 90-second version in a meeting, gather reactions, and revise. Over time, these small field experiments refine both content and delivery. Keep a talks notebook where you log lessons from each rehearsal and each live event. Over months, this becomes a personal curriculum of what works for your voice and audience. Rehearsal with intention converts anxiety into anticipation and creates a consistent pattern of improvement that makes every public moment a learning opportunity rather than a performance stress. Chapter 19. Leading through change. Communicating vision. During transition, change is where leadership is tested and where words either steady a team or scatter it. The leader's job during transition is to convert uncertainty into a sequence of intelligible, credible steps that people can follow. Start by accepting the reality that change creates legitimate cognitive and emotional work for everyone involved. People are not irrational for fearing disruption. Their brains are doing the work of protecting resources and predicting outcomes. The first practical move is to craft a change narrative that answers 3 questions in plain language. Where are we now? Why must we change? What does success look like after change? Put those answers into a 60 to 90-second framing. You can repeat verbatim across channels. Repetition reduces rumor and builds a shared mental model. Next, name the non-negotiables and the negotiables. People crave clarity about what will remain stable and what will evolve. Explicitly listing both categories reduces anxiety and prevents the background chatter that eats morale. Then design a phased communication cadence, an initial broad framing to orient, followed by regular tactical updates that translate strategy into day-to-day expectations, timelines, roles, immediate next steps. Each update should include a short "so what now" line that tells people the specific action they can or should take this week. Change fails when people cannot see their next small contribution. Third, practice high-frequency listening as part of your communication plan. Set regular short listening sessions, office hours, small group forums, or anonymous pulse checks, and treat them as intelligence gathering, not troubleshooting alone. When issues surface, acknowledge them publicly and incorporate feasible feedback into subsequent updates. Visible adjustments demonstrate responsiveness and earn trust. Fourth, use the power of small commitments to convert willingness into action. Ask for micro yeses that are low cost but meaningful. Attend a 20-minute briefing, complete a short training module, test a new process on one task. Small acts of compliance build behavioral pathways for larger changes later. Fifth, model behavioral change yourself visibly. Leaders who adopt the new processes early and publicly remove a major barrier. If you expect people to use a new tool, show up in the tool daily, publish updates there, and ask peer leaders to do the same. Authentic modeling reduces cynicism and accelerates adoption. Sixth, prepare managers as multiplying communicators. Change cannot be cascaded top-down alone. Frontline managers are translators. Provide them with concise leader scripts, FAQs, and decision guardrails so they can answer questions consistently and avoid inventing ad hoc policies that breed confusion. Seventh, manage the narrative of failure. Predefine acceptable experiments and failure learning cycles. Make it clear that early mistakes are data if they are followed by quick adjustments. When people know that learning, not perfection, is the goal for a transition sprint, they are likelier to engage. Eighth, attend to equity in change burdens. Transitions often redistribute work or risk unevenly. Name the burdens explicitly and offer compensating measures, time, resources, or recognition for those disproportionately affected. This fairness calculus prevents resentment and preserves long-term trust. Ninth, sustain hope by connecting the change to deeper values and tangible benefits. How will it protect customers, secure jobs, or create capacity for mission-critical work? Facts matter, but meaning sustains effort. Finally, end each major communication with a clear accountability structure and an invite. Who will steward the next phase, when the next update will arrive, and how people can contribute? Change leadership is not a one-time speech. It is a disciplined practice of framing, listening, modeling, and iterating. When you make the pathway visible, manageable, and fair, you convert the natural anxiety of transition into focused energy and collective forward motion. Chapter 20. The Spoken Legacy. Building a voice that transforms organizations. A leader's spoken legacy is the accumulation of every conversation, decision, and ritual speech that shapes culture. If you want your voice to transform an organization long-term, think in decades, not quarters, and design speech as durable architecture. Start with the principle of consistency. The phrases, metaphors, and stories you repeat daily become cultural scaffolding. Choose a small set of core metaphors and repeatedly apply them in different contexts, strategy meetings, onboarding, performance reviews, so they become shared cognitive shorthand. This reduces friction in future conversations because people already have a common vocabulary to interpret trade-offs. Second, codify signature talks that you will deliver at predictable moments. Quarterly state of the organization updates, annual values conversations, and onboarding narratives. Each signature talk should have a clear purpose: to orient, to re-anchor, or to elevate. Design them with modular content so you can adapt to new facts while maintaining the core through line. Third, mentor the next generation speakers by building a speech mentorship program. Pair emerging leaders with public speaking mentors, require them to deliver short, coached updates at team meetings, and give them progressive stakes. This multiplies your voice through others and builds institutional rhetorical capacity. Fourth, institutionalize rituals of public learning. Create regular forums where leaders openly share their experiments, failures, and takeaways in short, structured formats. Public reflection models humility and creates a culture where speaking honestly is safe and useful. Fifth, invest in a shared archive of speech artifacts, recorded talks, annotated slide decks, and one-page summaries of pivotal speeches so that new members can quickly internalize the organization's meaning-making patterns. Memory makes culture portable. Sixth, use language to encode norms explicitly. Instead of assuming unwritten rules, name the behaviors you expect in short, normative phrases, solve to learn, or speak with data and dissent, and weave them into evaluations and onboarding. Explicit norms become the content of your legacy because they survive personnel turnover. Seventh, calibrate rhetoric to distribution. The way you speak to a small leadership team should be different in tone and detail from the way you speak to the whole company. Learn the art of scaling intimacy. How to make mass talk feel personal through stories and local references. Eighth, pair public commitment with structural reinforcement. If you call for greater cross-team collaboration, follow with resourcing changes such as shared incentives or cross-functional sprints. Speech that is unbacked becomes performative and erodes trust. Ninth, measure the stickiness of your spoken legacy with simple indicators: recall of core phrases in pulse surveys, frequency of metaphor usage across teams, and the number of times signature stories are retold in peer conversations. These signals tell you whether your voice is seeding culture or echoing in emptiness. Finally, plan your exit rhetoric. How will your voice continue to guide the organization when you are no longer its daily speaker? Create a succession narrative, archive lessons learned, and intentionally seed protégés who can carry forward the central metaphors and practices. A spoken legacy is not ego, it is custodianship of meaning. Speak with intentional repetition, teach others to speak well, and pair words with structural changes. Do this, and your voice will outlast your tenure and transform how people decide, act, and remember. Conclusion. The habit of speaking. To lead. Speaking like a leader is less an act than a habit, a daily compound of preparation, presence, listening, and iteration. The final practical advice is modular and executable. Before every important conversation, clarify the single outcome you want and the one sentence that would make it real. Practice the opening aloud, plan a brief listening move, and define the immediate next step you will ask for. After the conversation, capture one learning and one follow-up in 30 seconds. Do this repeatedly, and the mechanics of high-impact speech become automatic.